The need to communicate and collaborate on a global level has created a proliferation of cloud-based tools for businesses. But with new channels come new gaps for hackers and many new security blind spots. You need full threat visibility across channels with a solution that works at the speed your company does. Perception Point's multi-layered platform provides the most robust threat prevention on the market. Perception Point Advanced Collaboration Security Designs for the Modern Enterprise. Visit securityweekly.com/Perception Point. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. You can visit securityweekly.com/subscribe. Subscribe to all of our podcast feeds, all of the shows across our network, including a soon-to-be-released new show called Hacker Heroes. All those episodes are downloaded right to your device each and every week on your favorite podcast platform. If you like the shows, and it helps us out tremendously, give us a review, whether on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Make sure you go in there, review the podcast. That would be awesome. Also, you can join our mailing list Discord server and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms, all at securityweekly.com/subscribe. We also have a free webcast series that we're doing this year. All we ask is that you give us your name and email address so that we can email you content relevant to the webcast that you attend. We don't share your name or email address with anyone. April 14th, learn how to monitor your Wi-Fi. That's tomorrow with Enzyme. Larry, myself, and Leonard Koopman will be hosting that wireless IDS with Enzyme, free and open source wireless IDS. Alan Stakalakis and Tyler Robinson and myself will also learn how to gain visibility into your enterprise with Sysmon. Also, myself and our good friend Rich Mogul on May the 4th.
Oh, Jesus. You got him on that date?
You can imagine Rich's slides. This is all Rich's content.
He's going to be dressed as a stormtrooper.
I'm just there for the discussion. We're going to talk about how to choose the right architecture for your application in the cloud with a splash of security as well. So all live attendees of these webcasts will have a chance to win a $100 Hacker Warehouse gift card. Register for all of the webcasts at securityweekly.com/webcast. Work on getting the archive out there. In the meantime, you can visit securityweekly.com/on-demand. Alrighty. On to the news for this week. A lot of interesting news this week, I thought.
Lots of weird sort of
I guess we gotta start with like Sandworm 2.0.
Yeah.
Right?
And apologies for having some stories in there that you covered last week.
No worries, dude.
So we can skip those and just move right along.
You picked like the good ones we covered last week too, so we can cover them again.
Like, dude, great minds think alike for how many years now?
Like the porn on the charging stations.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Like, yeah. Like, how many years have we had that type of synergy for?
How many years have we covered porn on like electronic billboards? Like, it seems like if you put up an electronic billboard, it's going to be hacked. Someone's going to put porn on it. And now your charging stations that have an LCD screen, someone's going to put porn on it, right? Like, I guess there's worse things people could do, with that. I suppose it also depends on the kind of porn. And hopefully people keep it lighthearted porn. Like, like there's different levels, okay? And if you don't secure that stuff, it's going to have porn on it. On a more serious note,
because the internet's for porn.
As we know, the initial attacks that Russia launched against Ukraine, was that 2017? Was the initial wave of attacks? I think it was 2017, right? Were somewhat successful. I mean, obviously, it kind of spawned a lot of attention and fear with cyber attacks that can turn off the power, which is bad, and we've talked about that quite a bit, over the years, even before 2017. So now, what I thought was interesting is this new wave, and there's lots of different names that they're calling it in the article, and you had to see this coming. So, in Destroyer malware, right? So this is what they're calling In Destroyer 2, also dubbed Sandworm. The original attacks, we can certainly, they call it out right here in the article in Ars Technica by Andy Greenberg, right, who's been following these stories very closely for many years. Unit 74455 of Russia's GRU military intelligence called out specifically as In Destroyer or Crash Override. in disrupting the power grid in Ukraine. And now we get a new wave. What I thought was interesting is that Ukraine's expecting, like we all expected, especially folks in Ukraine are expecting, like Russia's going to try this again. And like why wouldn't they, right? Like this is like, the punch is coming. So you're going to get ready for it and you're going to try and duck. It seems like, and again, I'm just reading what's in the, popular press, as it were. My comment was, turn the power off once, shame on you. Let it happen again, shame on me. So this was it was quoted in the article as relatively limited damage from Russia's cyber operations. They say represents not merely Russia's lack of focus on cyber war as it carries out a full-blown physical war, but also Ukraine's growing ability to defend itself in the digital domain. I think that's really interesting that they're kind of calling out like Russia probably could have done a better job with this attack, but also coupled with that is Ukraine's increased cyber defenses, as also I think is in the mix that folks like the U.S. and others are helping Ukraine with their cyber defenses because we're on the side of the good guys, and the good guys, we help each other.
Tyler's going to comment here.
Tyler, I know you're chomping at the bit, weigh in on this. I set the stage. Turn over to you now.
Appreciate that. No, I think there's a lot of things at play. I mean, one, we've seen the 2017. We're going to call that a test.
Yeah,
we've seen, we've got multiple variations of this, and we can attribute a good portion of the code between, Isaac Wiper, Caddy Wiper, Whispergate, a couple of the deployment mechanisms for some of the other wipers we're seeing. All of these really, they tie in and correlate, but are we seeing things from a lens of this is a quick one and done? Like they've already got physical access. They've already owned good portions of the country. Why would they launch these particular attacks? My theory is, and again, this is 100% me, no corroborating evidence that can be publicly shared, is this may be another test where they were checking out their capabilities. They're looking at very specific functions that are highly probable to the power within inside of Ukraine. One, to test those functions, test the rewrite of this, because this was highly rewritten. The Indestroyer 2 is an entirely new update of modules. But the very specific tasks that they were looking at using and the way that they've modulated some of this makes it, again, like, they're unfocused, but was this to test out the new capability that they've not had a chance since 2017 to retest some of the tools, and they're looking for the next bigger hit? So I think there's quite a bit in play with all the different toolkits that we're seeing from a wiper standpoint. Like,
sure,
we're seeing so many variations.
I do agree. I think there's some. There could be a lot of deception here and a lot of testing and feeling out the waters. I also feel like it could be as simple as, if you follow MMA fighting, right? And you look at you throw certain punches and kicks to see how your opponent is going to defend those, right? And you're kind of the best and the smartest fighters are adding it into their database of like, okay, like I tried that and here's how they responded. So when I craft the next attack, it's going to look different based on that. In this case, the person's response. In this case, based on the nation state's response to that. I tested some stuff. Here's how they responded. Let me go back and tune and tweak, and then maybe launch the next one. That this isn't. I guess what you're saying, Tyler, right? This isn't like a one and done kind of thing. It's not like, I tried attacks against the power grid, didn't work, I'm moving on. This is constant, iterative testing until you get something that works.
And it's a good step in time testing for what visibility they have, what responses, who is implementing and helping them, where did the modules and stopgaps the way they were intended. I don't think anything was not done that was supposed to be done. But also you look at the satellite hacking and acid rain and the firmware brick there. Again, why hit all the consumer ones when those could have been leveraged for much bigger targets? That could have been in-memory things that could have been done for relaying, potential botnet activity and implantation. Like, again, it doesn't add up to, unless they're literally just grasping at straws and they're not that organized and different groups are not communicating as well, which is entirely possible. We see that in our own military.
I think in the satellite case, that could be the case because firmware is near and dear to my heart, right? I would, if I was in charge of the offensive cyber operations, I would not have squandered that opportunity, right? I would not have gone to let's brick everything. I would have gone low and slow.
Yep. And
in that attack.
I've got a theory and untested, and I'd love to float it by you. Yeah. We're seeing, from what I'm hearing, we're seeing sort of a subpar cyber response from Russia, and like the satellite thing, like they did it and they squandered that opportunity. And from my understanding, that Russia has always claimed that no, it's not us. Like we're none of this stuff is our cyber whatever. But how much of the actual stuff that Russia, and I'm using Russia, is doing is mercenary based? Pay for hire. Like they've contracted some hacking group to go do X, Y, and Z so that the government can really say, well, we didn't do it, but they paid somebody to do it. So they're being honest, as it were. And I'm wondering, because these groups have more ready, I would argue, have more ready access to internet data, that they can make decisions about what they see in other forms of media because they've probably been granted more access to be able to deliver these attacks, that they can maybe make some decisions about, hey, maybe Russia's not doing the right thing, and we see all this non-state sponsored media, so while they're getting paid by the Russian government to do all these hacks, it's kind of like, well, we'll try.
We'll try. We'll still get paid from Russia. I see what you're going, man. Like, we'll still get paid from Russia, and we'll try. And we'll be like, hey, Russia, like, oops, that's the best we could do.
Yeah, it didn't work this time. But we can try again with something a little bit more.
It's an interesting theory, Larry. I like it a lot.
Yeah, we did this SAT thing. I'm like, oh, yeah, maybe we made a mistake. We didn't leverage that for all there could, but they're offline now. And now they can't be used. So
yeah, I think there is a lot of that happening, and from a denial of service standpoint, breach standpoint, like you're seeing a lot of the pro-Russian criminal activist groups getting involved. I mean, you got Lorik 53, you've got a bunch of the free civilians, you've got even Conti and some of the ransomware that are bought into and paid off or have a mutual understanding with government entities. So you have a lot of that interaction. I think some of the code for some of the more advanced implant and wipers, like not all of them, like you're 100% Larry, I think there's a lot there that is not public, but the wipers and the code sharing between some of them, like the hermetic wipers and the implant systems used for those, are pretty specific. So unless we had some misattribution early on, which is entirely possible, I think we're starting to kind of see some overlap, and we're starting to see the sophistications between the different groups. Like there's a big difference between some of the FSB groups and some of the GRU groups, and there's a definite difference between some of the handlers and managers of those different groups and what their targets are and their sophistication level. So we're 100% going to see that, and I think we're going to continue to see that as we move forward.
Again, this is me just playing armchair cyber political.
I think the lull and silence is all of us running that through our brains, Larry. So I think it was very thought-provoking for sure.
If anybody wants to get a good handle on kind of what some of the players are from like a very quick and dirty, like all of the different things we've seen over the month, it's been a busy month from leaks to breaches to understandings of, malware and ransomware and all the things that are happening. Like check out Eclipsium's report for March, their threat report, which is free to everybody. They cover all of the things with inside of 1 month very, very well and very accurately. So if you're looking for something, that's a good place to start.
Also, they made available their free firmware checking tool.
Yes.
A version of that. And I ran that and I was really impressed. I was like, oh,
it is
crap. I didn't update my BIOS. And like the way they construct that report, I was like, oh, that is really interesting. The way that they did that. Their
founders are very, very pro-Ukrainian. Like he's from Ukraine.
Yep.
Alex,
one of the founders.
They're doing amazing work over there, like in the shadows at night, all of the things and extra effort they're putting forward. Like Eclipsium is the forefront of a lot of help that's going on at the firmware and low level Intel base level. So yeah, definitely give them some support. They're offering help inside just with their free tool, but if you've got other stuff that's critical with inside Ukraine, like reach out. They're working tirelessly to help anybody that's working on Ukraine stuff. So.
I the written piece this week that, quite frankly, could win an award for journalism from Andy Greenberg.
You're talking about the Wired one,
dude. Andy Greenberg is like legit.
He's on fire,
dude. Amazing journalist, an amazing writer. Like that dude. I mean, let's put cybersecurity aside for a moment, right? And kind of nerd out on the way you construct a story, on the way you do copywriting, on the way you like hook a reader and get them interested in a story. Like, dude, he is firing on all cylinders. He's got a couple of articles that I think the Ars Technica article on Russia's sandworm, dude, that's Andy Greenberg. Yeah. Right? But the article we just covered was Andy. And then you can read, I mean, it reads like a book.
Dude, I had a lot of stuff I should have been doing in that half hour that I read that. But
it's not a short read at all, but it's totally worth it. Where is that story?
It is your story number 14.
How Bitcoin tracers took down the web's biggest child abuse site.
Oh, different Andy Greenberg.
Other article. Yeah, 14 is his article.
Yep, 14 is his article.
On Russia's Sandworm version 2.0.
Yep.
And number 8 is inside the Bitcoin bust that took down the web's biggest child abuse site. Like the emotional roller coaster he takes you through, the technical aspects of how blockchain and cryptocurrency work. Tyler, I mean, I thought it was spot on, but you were my go-to resource on that. You're nodding your head like it was spot on. No,
it was 100% spot on, and it was, unfortunately, it was kind of one of the dirty secrets of blockchain that many of us hope didn't get out quite as much because of stories like this. There was a lot of stuff Chain Analysis was doing early on to really get a hold of some really nasty people, and this is the stories that many people can mention over beers, but they don't actually get the full picture. This is the stories that we wanted to talk about at beers. Like these guys were doing that stuff.
Like the law enforcement, criminal scumbags, like basically child pornography trafficking scumbags, crosses multiple countries, multiple different cryptocurrency exchanges, dark web sites. What was the dark website that they dubbed it? It was something video market, something like that. What was it called?
Welcome to Video.
Welcome to Video was the scumbag site where they basically took down the largest collection of child pornography ever to be taken down in one shot. But like the whole article chronicles the persistence from, they talk about IRS agents, which kind of get downplayed.
Dude, IRS,
right? Like kind of get downplayed in law enforcement, but the article definitely calls it out, because like I've met IRS agents. I'm like, wait, you guys carry guns and like do investigations? And they're like, yeah. Yep. And like you lose sight of that, but like following the money and the taxes is an investigation. And I mean, they deserve like total props in this investigation, but it's FBI, it's international organizations, folks in the UK being supported by Chain Analysis and other blockchain analysis and kind of tracking groups. And they busted servers in Seoul, Korea, all the way to raiding someone's house in Atlanta, Georgia, into Texas. Like when I read this article, I was like, I am so like thankful that there are law enforcement agents that have like learned this technology. As we've learned in the past 30 plus years, law enforcement wasn't always the best like technical chops. I read this article, I'm like, I am so glad like they have picked up these technical chops and then applied that to being able to conduct these investigations, doing the collaboration between law enforcement, targeting it to these groups that are breaking, I mean, all kinds of laws, not just like IRS tax laws, not just child pornography laws, but hacking laws, but the whole, laundering, money laundering, the fraud, the whole thing. And I mean, they took down like a huge swath of, like, what turned out to be horrible people, like holding people hostage that were committing sex crimes against minors. I'm just like, I'm so glad there's people that are working for law enforcement in multiple countries that are working on this and having success in the age where as we all know, most of us know on the show, listening to the show, hiding in today's internet can be a lot easier than it was before. Thankfully, in this welcome to video, they kind of, I think the mistake they made, thankfully, the mistake they made was just thinking that cryptocurrency provided them the anonymity that they thought they wouldn't get caught. And they're like, chain analysis was like, they were like, no, dude, that's totally not true. And so glad they make that available to law enforcement to be able to conduct these investigations. Like, a huge win that this was shut down.
I think there was three main points in that story, like from a technical standpoint. Like one, bad guys are going to make mistakes. We'll call that, like, we know that.
We know that. We've seen that a million times, right?
Those mistakes are there.
Yeah.
The pieces that you don't expect is the importance of relationships across multiple verticals, industries, and boundaries. Like, a lot of that couldn't have happened without some of those early established InfoSec, or call it, interdepartmental or cross-departmental relationships, like the relationship in Seoul, some of the stuff with HSI. Those things, if people hadn't made those relationships and kept good connections and done good work between each other, like, some of this wouldn't have happened. The second piece to that was, like, some of the novelty and ways in which chain analysis and others are doing the collaboration and then the tedious work of tying those back to individuals. I mean, that's real investigative work, but they've got some very creative ways to do that. And realizing how early on they were doing that really shed some light on how far ahead, like, IRS and some of the other departments are that are using it. There's not everybody that's there, so we have to be able to do that. The third piece that I really seen was the hardship they had in educating and having to brief and continue to fill in local law enforcement, state law enforcement, and the people that have to take down the people. Like, not everybody knows, all the evidence you're providing them in a nice package. They still don't get it, so you have a lot of continuing
But I also think, Tyler, along those lines, like 3A is the forensics that have to take place, right? Like, they seem to be able, reading this article, they seem to be able to do that pretty cleanly. Like, they don't go into detail in the article, but I read between the lines, and it seemed like they nailed that, like, capturing the forensics evidence, analyzing the forensics evidence, feeding that back to the investigators seemed like a really well-practiced loop that they've learned over the past 20, 30 years as computers, like 30, 40 years ago, right, is when we first started seeing computers using crimes. Like, now we fast forward to today, like 3A in your list, Tyler, is nailing that forensics and getting the right information to the right people to be able to go make those arrests and bust down doors and get the people who were committing those crimes, in being confident in doing that. And, like, it didn't seem like there were a lot of mistakes. Like, they didn't bust down the wrong doors. They didn't, like, make mistakes where it wasn't admissible in court and all that stuff. And that shit you can get wrong pretty easily, right?
Really easy.
It's easy to get that shit wrong. And they nailed it. And they nailed it. And you have to nail it with these people. You have to nail it. You have to.
Yeah, they realized it could ruin someone's life, and even a misattribution would still ruin their life. So they were very cognizant of how right they had to be, and that was, also you got to feel some of that weight of what they were doing. Right.
I mean, and there were some, like, true scumbags in here, but there was also people who were, like, PhD accomplished academics. One person, the way he leads in with the article is like a vice principal of a school, and then he got implicated in other crimes where he was assaulting kids at the school. I don't know if those charges were dismissed or what, but that was kind of brought to light. I mean, some of that stuff gets battled out in court, and hopefully they go to prison for a really long time, regardless. But still, like, I was impressed with law enforcement wholeheartedly in this article, and, like, really encouraged that people fighting the good fight.
Absolutely.
Also, Andy did an amazing job writing this up. Like, you should, as a listener, make sure you go read this article, because, like,
and that was your story number
8. Yes, posted in Wired, inside Bitcoin bust that took down the web's biggest child abuse site. Yeah.
Awesome. Just want to make sure we're telling our listeners to go read this. I'm gonna have to read this later.
You don't go to the show notes, right? You should be able to find it on Wired. Like, it's pretty.
Yep. I'm gonna have to read this later too, because I missed this. I was.
It's a long read, dude. Like, you're in for a journey. Like, it's basically like a chapter or two of a book, but it's, like, worth it. It's not a lot of articles where, like, it's worth like most articles would give you, like, this is a 3-minute read, this is an 8-minute read. Like Tyler said, This is like a 30-minute read.
Yeah. Like those are the good. Those are the like for the ones that like commodities. These were the good ones. Like I think there was a Wired article that we discussed a while back about some of the crypto stuff that the Russians were doing during World War II, and like these are some stuff that gems, are crazy. Man.
We read a lot. I mean, you listeners see it. Like you see the articles we cover. You hear us talking about them.
Yep.
Some are a quick read. Some are a very technical read. You got to go back and do some research. Some are just like you just got to go read it, and not a whole lot of technical stuff in here, and it's explained very well, which is rare. Not everyone nails the articles.
Andy Greenberg has Andy Greenberg been on the show?
We want to bring him on the show.
Awesome.
Yeah, he's definitely on the short list of bringing him on the show.
Andy, if you're listening,
yes, definitely need to have Andy on the show. If nothing else, to say thank you to a bunch of things that he's written, right? And bringing this stuff to light. My story number 7, the article right before that.
I was just going to say, speaking of Andy, kind of bearded Barbie.
Oh, kind of weird. Like, I read the title and it said bearded Barbie hackers catfish high-ranking Israeli officials. That's very catchy. Like, because you're thinking Barbie with a beard, which conjures up images which are like, that's kind of weird.
And then that they got catfished.
And catfish, like I'm like, that's kind of weird. Like, I don't understand how a Barbie, like you think of the image, like if I say Barbie, like in a psychological test, you say Barbie and you say, describe the first image that comes to mind. Like you're going to describe the Barbie doll. Okay, bearded Barbie. I'm like, how are you using that to catfish Israeli officials? Because Israeli people are just some of the most amazing people on the planet that I've ever met, right? In so many different aspects. Like how are you, like, how does this all tie together? But it turns out
there's a neck beard behind the Barbie. Is that the?
It's got to be.
But I call this.
That's a great one, Tyler.
I dubbed this catfished with a PH because that's essentially what I think is happening. It happened here, right? So basically.
They gain trust of a target. They
I believe it was Hamas created these fake social media accounts, gained the trust of their target by interacting with them for a while. Adversaries suggest migrating the conversation to WhatsApp for better privacy. So like this is a whole social engineering campaign where I hook them in on Facebook as a major social media platform. I then get my target to transition to WhatsApp for better privacy because I'm social engineering, creating a persona.
Then sexy time happens.
Sexy time happens. The article says the conversation takes an erotic turn, and the threat actor suggests another pivot to a supposedly more discreet Android IM app, which is actually volatile venom malware. Simultaneously, the operative sends a link to a RAR file that purportedly contains a sexual video, but is really a downloader for barbed wire backdoor. So this is where the bearded Barbie kind of like story. So the title doesn't really do it justice. Exactly what's happening. I think I linked to another article that breaks it down, differently in a slightly more technical way. But like basically, you're taking a target from a social media platform to WhatsApp to a specialized app that maybe is the first stage loader that then is delivering a second stage loader that's compromising an Israeli official. I can't imagine, knowing as the many Israeli people as I know, and as awesome as they are, and as like awesome as they are in OPSEC, cybersecurity, hacking, and all that stuff, like that they would actually fall for this. Like I can't imagine their success rate was very high in this case. I can't.
Not with people that matter.
Right? Exactly, Tyler.
And arguably I haven't read the article, but how long did this activity take?
It's a good question. They don't provide a timeline, Larry.
I'd venture to guess that it was really in for the long haul. Like this was not you gain trust in a couple of days, we move to WhatsApp. It was probably multiple years.
It could be that. It could be a long. This is a long game, which, I mean, still the success rate I think is going to be kind of low. But maybe they know that. I mean, they probably know that that 1-2% is going to be successful.
It's like
and that's what they're after.
It's like the same reason why spam emails work.
Yes,
because
1-2%.
You send millions of emails. You send multiple conversations. It's cheap. and 1 to 2% works, and it pays for everything. Go ahead, Lee.
I mean, if you read the article, you'll notice that they did create some fake Facebook profiles, but they curated them for months to make them look legitimate.
Right.
So that
Yeah.
history, you knew it wasn't created yesterday.
It wasn't like the Russians that don't put a whole lot of effort into many of their fake.
Some
like
Russians.
we all see that, and we're like, that's clearly a Russian fake account, Lee, right? Like that's. But
Right.
sometimes attackers will put that effort into that persona, like they were making posts in Hebrew and like really selling it, you know?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
This one doesn't look any better than the last 20 I've gotten that has 2 pictures, the created date, when they were born, which is all valid information stolen from another account, and no other information. Like, this looks pretty straightforward.
Yeah, I think it did kind of hint towards the AI.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry. The AI that like creating the images. Like,
yeah, this person
knowing that
Yeah.
images will be scrutinized, right? Knowing that we can determine the origin of an image, like these are AI created images. They did sound like they went through some steps to create an image that would, even if you did some investigation, like come back as like an actual image.
Would be unique.
Would be unique.
This person does not exist.com. Right.
Yes.
Tyler nailed it.
Right.
Some of those are pretty damn freaky.
Some of those are can be pretty freaky.
Tyler's on mute.
Oh,
I can see the lips moving, but ain't nobody home.
Some of those are just taking pictures out of pictures, like going through photo albums, cropping out and re-editing and touching up so that the hash values are different. You don't get the same 10i response from some of those. Pulling them out and modifying them a little bit.
Dude, that technology totally exists. So the latest Pixel, I got the latest Pixel like last year. I don't know if you guys used this feature on the Pixel or the latest versions of Android. I'm not sure how far they backported this feature, but if I take a picture of Larry and I are at a restaurant, right, and I take a picture of Larry and there's a bunch of people and crap in the background, like it can like automatically I forget the exact steps, but like I go into edit, I go into like advanced, and I go smart crop. It will, using AI and machine learning, look at people in the background and objects, right? AI machine learning, everyone drink. Using that technology will eradicate all of that stuff from the background to give me just Larry. Which, I mean, I've tested it quite a bit. I'm like, that works really well. Smart Erase, I think it's called Smart Erase or something like that.
Yeah.
Like, it works
tested against other pictures.
Lee finds this conversation incredibly boring.
yeah, right. Yeah.
It's jet lag. I literally saw you nod off.
Yes.
Yeah, I literally saw Lee just nod off for a minute there.
So, but I can see attackers using that kind of similar stuff to create right images that are like, oh, kind of past some of the initial filters, right? Anyway, NginxDay. Some exploits.
Like, this is like breaking news. Like, this came up on one of our earlier segments today.
Like, really strange disclosure that I found for this one. Like, this didn't seem like a traditional security researcher. This kind of seemed like what we would more traditionally team as a term or label, I guess, if you will, as a gray hat kind of thing. Like, they didn't seem totally like black hat, but it totally wasn't a white hat researcher. Like, this was kind of gray hat. Like, we found this thing and like, yeah, we totally want to get paid for it, but we're gonna kind of drop it anyway. It was kind of weird. It had to do with the LDAP subsystem within NginxDay. I'm not sure how prevalent that is, ubiquitous that is, to use today in NginxDay deployments. NginxDay did release a statement on the actual bug, how to fix it, mitigate it, release patches for it. But there are exploits out there for it, from what I've seen more recently. I mean, this stuff's breaking like today. Tyler, you were dropping some links in there. Like, stuff is happening now, basically, with this.
Yeah, there's several POCs that got dropped, and it is the LDAP library inside of NginxDay specifically. But I I foresee that there may be more places this is used. It's used in a really interesting way for Nginx, so it may or may not end up being vulnerable in other things. But yeah, it's been dropped. The interesting thing about the people dropping these, a lot of these times, like where they may be security researchers, they're often foreign, so they don't have the connections, they don't understand the process. These are getting dropped in.
Yeah, reading the GitHub NginxDay.
Yep. It's well written.
English was not the first language, though.
Yeah,
it is well written. I agree, Larry. Like it's not. But you can by reading it. I think that's something as like incident responders and security researchers, we kind of glean like when you read the English text, we categorize it, right? Like English is not your first language is the obvious first like bucket we put it in.
Update 8, as Nginx have now released a blog post like that speaks to me right there.
Right.
I've read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 words, and I can tell not native English speaker.
There is definitely a difference between someone who has English as their native language and just isn't really great at writing versus someone whose English is not their native language and is trying to write something in English. Like, I don't know. As investigators, we've kind of learned to distinguish between the two.
There's subtle ways in which they learn English based on their native language and the way they were taught based on their native language.
Yeah.
The one that I find interesting, I was like, oh, well, update 8 was what I read those 8 words or so from.
Sure.
And the last time that update 8 was provided to that particular GitHub repo was 2 days ago. Oof. Like, this has been out for 2 days already? And we're kind of just showing, it's kind of just making the radar now?
Yeah, but it's kind of, it speaks to me like a gray hat kind of, like they're like, oh, we've been offered 200,000 in XMR for the exploit. Like that, to me, also, I mean, like languages aside, like those type of statements are typically made by those kind of gray hat, if you will.
Update 8. If you're thinking we're, quote, only interested in the money, yes. What do you expect? We're a threat group, LOL.
Yeah.
I'm very wondering.
Oh, you're siloning, Lee.
Damn it. And
there's a lot of
important
there's a lot of things that are being protected right now by Nginx. So the amount that this is worth, like, yeah, I can definitely see this. This is almost a log4j in that it is widely deployed.
Yep.
The version is probably widely deployed, and the exploitability on this one is not that difficult, to be honest. And there's a lot of important things behind Nginx. So if these get compromised, it provides access to things that should not have access provided.
Yeah. Let's see if Lee's not a Cylon.
I changed microphones, so I probably don't sound so good. But
no, you sound great.
So my question was, what's the time limit? And they're sitting here, you know, hey, when are they going to respond? When are they going to get back to me? I mean, it's, you know, I was trying to think back into how long the timeline here was. I mean, you know, if you have a VDP, you really need to respond. But it's, you know, is he waiting 5 minutes, 5 days, an hour?
Yeah, it's a great question, Lee, and I wasn't able to glean this because it was kind of late breaking. Like, is there a patch, or are there mitigations, or they're both?
There's mitigations. You can disable the LDAP daemon or add some code into your LDAP.d, and I believe that is a mitigating or compensating control.
Gotcha.
But the proof of concept just barely came out. Like, we've known that there's a 0-day. We've known there's an exploit for, I think it's been maybe 4 days. Like, it was dropped in a forum a little while ago, but there wasn't a POC. So up until now, we're kind of conjecturing on the POC. Then they dropped the POC, and now this is public, and it's going to be a bigger deal. So either someone's getting paid, or there's going to be a patch put out, and it's not worth anything.
Or the mitigations are pretty valid. Again, I haven't dug into it, right? Like, I don't want to knock Nginx, because if they put out a blog post and they're like, here are the mitigations, and in their assessment, your mitigations are totally valid, and by the way, we're working on a patch as well, like, that's pretty valid. Like, the fact that they made a public blog post, and I mean, it was pretty detailed. I didn't read it in detail, again, because there was a lot of stories, and this was one of them that was kind of late breaking, right? But it kind of seemed like they were being pretty transparent. Like, there's an issue. Here's some mitigations, and you're probably going to see a patch it pretty soon. But like even Microsoft doesn't really come out and like, oh, here are some mitigations while we're working on a patch, right?
Yep.
Like
it looks like they had 3 different ways to mitigate.
Yeah. So I mean, if you're running NginX, and I mean specifically, do you have to have some LDAP modules and support in here, or is this like a if you're running NginX?
I think the LDAP.d or the LDAP process is actually running on NginX by default. It may not be being used, so unless you've hardened your NginX from defaults, I think it was default if I remember reading it right. I was testing the POC and I haven't looked into the mitigations pieces yet. That's what I was supposed to be doing next. So
I think if you're running NginX, you got to pay attention to this. Is what we're saying.
Yeah.
Regardless of your configuration, like go check.
Yeah, I mean, this week has been kind of a weird week for news, but you look at some of the things that have dropped. There were 2 0 days in Microsoft that they disclosed. There's a DevOps critical. There was 115 CVEs and vulnerabilities this week in Patch Tuesday.
It was a big Patch Tuesday yesterday, right? Yeah. It was yesterday, right?
Bunch of RPC stuff that is potentially wormable.
Yeah, remote, like a 9.8, like remote code execution through RPC unauthenticated externally via one of those 0 days, and it was being actively exploited. So that's a big deal. Plus, I mean, 115 for Microsoft. That's a pretty big Patch Tuesday. And there was another 0 day that was dropped literally 23 hours ago around print spooler. So again, make sure your print spoolers disable domain controllers.
Which you should have already had done because of a bunch of stuff not all that long ago.
Yeah.
Print nightmare.
Yep.
Was one of these SMB remote procedure call runtime library 9.8 out of 10 CVE 2022 26809? Dan Kim at Versec, which is a company that I recognize. Versec does great work. This was they say a vulnerability found in SMB.
Yep, you got one in RPC, you've got one in SMB that were critical. There were 5 criticals? 2 of them were 0 days. One of them actively exploited with RCE.
It's not too often we talk about Patch Tuesday, right? As like late breaking.
We used
news.
to all the time.
Yeah, but like usually today it's like stuff we know about. Sure, apply the patches, like you're all good.
Yeah.
This one seems to be
mid to medium
addressing 2 0 days, which is kind of.
I mean, that
not
and then
not like the MO Microsoft. Microsoft does a pretty good job today of locking shit down.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you've got that. You've got Struts 2. You've got NginX. You've got this week has been from a drop week. It's been pretty heavy, honestly.
Yeah.
But I didn't get through the Struts 2. Struts 2 had some stuff. CISA put out an advisory for Struts 2.
Lee might have had a comment back there.
Go ahead, Lee.
I was going to say, well, we're talking about Microsoft. We want to talk about their new auto patch stuff to go with all the fun stuff they put out.
Before we get to Struts 2, I absolutely agree, Lee. We should talk about their new auto patch feature, which seems to me like what we've been accomplishing with third-party tools. Perhaps if you know Active Directory well enough, you could accomplish natively in Active Directory, and that is updating not on Microsoft's schedule, but on your own schedule for native Microsoft Windows OS vulnerabilities, but also Office vulnerabilities and some adjacent stuff as well. It seems like this auto patch feature kind of gives you the, you want to update every Patch Tuesday, but now they're giving the option for enterprises to upgrade as soon as the stuff comes out and not waiting until Patch Tuesday. Did I get that? Did I glean that correctly from these articles?
Yeah, that's been a thing. I mean, you've got different like preview and developer pipelines and early beta, early tester. You've had a lot of that availability. You can opt into Insider, but now they're starting to push that a little bit more mainstream, where you just get it. So it's a nice feature, and I think it is something that a lot of people will appreciate. Maybe not with inside of bigger enterprises that have change process testing, dev environments, like production things that you'll lose millions of dollars a minute. Like those are places you test these things. Other people like, let's get this out there so we don't have botnets running around on people's home crap over the place.
Yeah,
it's where I've always felt that we should be with Microsoft patches. I don't want to wait until Patch Tuesday and then triage all the stuff, test all the stuff, and then roll it out. Like I want it. I think in many environments, you can just roll this stuff out
now,
and not roll it all at once, right? I think it was what Microsoft was saying in their advisories is that you do what we advise many enterprises to do. Take this patch as soon as it's available, roll it out to a subset, make sure it's good. If it's good, keep rolling out. Like you're just basically in a constant state of rolling out patches, like testing it, right? Like roll it out. It's
like a CI/CD pipeline.
Exactly. That's what I'm a big fan of. Like keep rolling it out. Like if it causes a problem, sure, roll it back, do some testing, make it work, and then keep going. But like you're always in this cycle of doing it. Like to me, waiting to the second Tuesday of every month. I mean, go back to in our archives. Like we've kind of picked upon that. Like I don't want to wait. Like don't queue it up for me. I think there's so many organizations, especially today, that can go, no, good. Like give me the updates. Give me the update. I'll get them out. Like don't spoon. Like you don't need to hand hold me and spoon feed me. Like I'll get it out.
Yeah.
To Tyler's point, though, there are some organizations that are like, again, you lose your point, Tyler, losing millions of dollars a minute. I totally get it. Like not everyone can patch the same way for every single system, but at least give the folks the opportunity who want that and can do it, the opportunity to patch as soon as that stuff is available.
Now, my question would be, is the stuff that's on the quote advanced release, is that like a binary patch? Like, you remember back in the day, like the third-party patches were things?
Yes.
Like, there's a 0 day, and like the patch for this won't come out until Patch Tuesday or Microsoft releases something out of cycle. But you can go and patch this binary by doing this edit
third
to
party.
It.
Yeah.
This third-party edit of a binary. Are they...
Hopefully they're wiping that out.
Are they edits of a binary, or are they like a full patch thing that we're now alpha testing their patches for release on Patch Tuesday?
I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, I don't think so either. But that's just my question. What role are they taking on this?
Usually, if it's released to Insider or it's released pre-Patch Tuesday, those are pretty well tested.
Okay, so
just because of
traditional patch cycle as opposed to binary.
Yeah, it's not like an out of bound in process alpha version of a KB exe that you're going to have iterations of multiple times. Like this is what you're going to get provided when you get the Patch Tuesday update. Gotcha. It's been tested out well. I mean, and a lot of this that defense in depth, like we've been talking, the medium to small business, they don't always have all of these layers that other things have, or visibility configurations done right. So these are the people that really do need some of these immediate patches, because they're the ones getting popped because they don't have the extra pieces. Like, I mean, one of the 0 days was you should be blocking 445 at your enterprise perimeter firewall, but you look at what SMB and Soho routers and stuff are doing, they're not blocking that by default. You've got almost all of those available, or there's UPnP, and so there's other issues with this. So we really do need to get these people patched quicker, and I think they're a good demographic to test that and make that like readily available.
Lee?
So I'm really excited about this, but I'm worried that people will forget this is only the Microsoft product stack.
Yep.
That Chrome vulnerability that you got to go to version 100, whatever the hell it is.
Yep.
You still got to do your own thing to get that out there. But it's just so exciting what they're doing. I really love it. I'm like, man, take that off my list of worries about and just get me down to the non-Microsoft stuff would be a win. And this is also just Windows 10 and 11 desktops, I think. No server stuff, right?
I think
so. It's only desktops.
I think so. I did see that, Lee, Windows 10 and 11. And I think many organizations, Lee, kind of riffing off your point, like I've got some redundancy in my workstations in 10 and 11, right? Like I've got here in the studio, like I don't have one system that runs Zoom that gets people like on our show. I've got 3 or 4. So like, right, like update 1. Like if shit's going well. I know pretty quickly, like if that's going to break my workflow, and if it doesn't, roll it out to the rest. And having that option to like really be aggressive in rolling out new software, especially for like highly purpose-built systems, like in a retail organization point of sale system, like roll it out to one store. Or roll it out to my test lab, like my test store.
Roll it out to your test stores, your 3 or 4 test stores.
Yeah, it's good. Right. So roll it out to 1 or 2, production stores. That's good. Roll it out to the rest. I can do that in a shorter time than waiting to the second Tuesday of the month to get it out there, right? And I'm protected. I think that's important. I think it's positive.
I do too. I've got 2 work laptops here. One is in the early tester program for the patches and updates. We actually test and stage, I think, somewhere about 150 of them before we roll it out everywhere. And then there's actually earlier testing ones in that where the patch team themselves is making sure it doesn't release the magic blue smoke.
Right.
And so, I'll see an all of a sudden patching activity, and I know what's going on that one. It's not my primary machine. It's okay if it breaks.
It's okay. I mean,
and
you also hope that Microsoft patches today don't break as much stuff as they used to. But there's always the exception. We've been burned by that, but I think they've been pretty
way better than once upon a time. It's way better. Anyway, I'm excited. This is going to be cool.
Yeah,
agreed.
Just the next evolution in Microsoft patching that maybe needed some attention. Doing a good job, but it can always get better.
Speaking of next evolution, next evolution of Raspberry Pi OSs.
Ooh.
They've gone to, which I really like, which I wish more IoT and device manufacturers would adopt, is not setting. So, Raspberry Pi has they've broken this down to username and password and treating those completely separately. They've gone more towards a traditional Linux distribution model where you choose your username and your password, right? Traditionally in Raspberry Pi, you always have the user Pi, and way back in the day, it was user Pi and it was a standard password.
Raspberry.
Raspberry. And so they got rid of the default password. Now they're getting rid of the default username, which I think is a great step. I implore other distributions and devices to do the same thing. I think this is a great thing in terms of the defaults. The defaults in especially purpose-built, embedded IoT systems are often what cause us heinous problems when it comes to security. And I think the new Raspberry Pi OS Bullseye has basically getting rid of the default Pi user. I think it's a great step. I think it's a step in the right direction. Certainly, they articulated it very well in that. Well, yeah, we got rid of the default password, so you still could brute force the Pi user, but now we're kind of taking away the Pi user. I think getting ahead of security in this particular scenario is the way to go.
Yep. So I particularly love this, and it's very much a response to some of the European legislation that is basically saying you can't have default usernames and passwords on your shit. Right. And I'm thinking about this, and I'm like, oh, well, great. It's going to ask you during boot time to create a new user that's not Pi, or could be Pi.
Yeah, ask you for your username and the screenshots.
Get a new username and password. I'm like, well, shit. 99% of the Raspberry Pis that I've ever installed are all headless.
They have a solution for that.
I'm like, fuck, how are they going to do that? Well, yeah, okay. Yeah, you echo some stuff into a file on the boot partition after you flash the... Well, the first one is if you use our official Raspberry Pi Imager tool, it will ask you these questions. And I'm like, no. And then it's like, oh, well, if you just put this in the a file with an encrypted password.
There's a file in the boot partition, right?
Yep, file in the boot partition that will configure this the first time that you boot this thing up, and it will apparently it deletes the file. Or if not, if nothing else, you can go and delete it afterwards.
You flash your micro SD card, and then you edit the file on your micro SD card.
Userconf.txt on the boot partition of the SD card.
Right.
Which contains a single line of text consisting of username : encrypted password, which the encrypted password is passed to OpenSSL password -6 standard.
Yeah, I think that's really smart.
Yeah, you know, I really like this, and I got work to do.
There was another article someone sent to me about performance on the Raspberry Pi and how micro SD is not as performant as an actual NVMe.
Okay.
It's somewhere in our internal Slack channel.
Yep, I think
it was John Kinsella, who's amazing.
Yep.
It kind of floated us by, like, when you're building purpose-built Raspberry Pis for things like what is the gaming one? The emulator? RetroPie. When you're building a RetroPie, not to do it on micro SD, but to do it on actual NVMe hardware. And there's a person who's done some amazing research in performance. I think he wrote a benchmarking tool and then produced all of his results and like makes hardware recommendations on how to do this. And I was like, oh, I'm like, dude, you're awesome. Like, that's for not just like I've built RetroPies in the past, and they're amazing and they're awesome, and the kids have so much fun with them, right? But also all of our Raspberry Pis that we purpose built for all kinds of different things can benefit from this person's research. So
I'd argue everything that I use a Raspberry Pi for definitely knows that there is some latency and isn't the most powerful computing platform, and everything that I throw at it is But then again, I'm not your typical Raspberry Pi user. I've probably got...
Hey, you know, it's hard to say what a typical Raspberry Pi user is, Larry.
But, well, I mean, typical Raspberry Pi user
here it is.
Has one or two. I have 50.
JamesAChambers.com has a post on February 4th, 2019, Raspberry Pi Cheap SSD Upgrade Guide.
Yep.
And, I mean, this person has done some amazing testing on like what hardware to buy, like performance benchmarked everything, and I thank John Kinsella from Application Security Weekly for bringing this to our attention. Just an amazing post. So if you're using Raspberry Pis, go to JamesAChambers.com, and he's got a lot of research and posts about how to do that.
Yep,
awesome stuff. What else?
Now, if we could only keep my RTL SDR cool, that would be awesome.
Oh, I was thinking about Paul when I saw the AWS Lambda hack.
Oh yeah, that was really interesting.
You started it too, Paul.
It was like I was kind of hoping
that's your story number 2.
Yeah, it was. I was kind of hoping, Lee, when I read this, that there was an actual attack against AWS Lambda, but it turns out, like, the way I read that, it was like generic kind of malware that kind of sensed that it was in Lambda and did specific things against it. So one of the features of the malware was to use DNS over HTTPS for communicating its command and control. So it doesn't necessarily target a weakness in Lambda, but checks for that environment and then does like specific stuff if it's in that environment. So like this malware will run on really like any kind of Linux type environment, but if it's in Lambda, it'll do special stuff. In the catosecurity.com blog provides way more details as to exactly how it operates in Lambda, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that popped out for me is, you know, it's written in Go and it's got an XMR ring crypto miner built into it.
Yep.
And I'm thinking, getting that flying in a serverless environment, that's interesting. I wonder if it could stay under the radar, because you know those are big resource hogs.
Yeah, you don't realize it till you get your bill, Lee, right?
Yeah, that's all you need, right, Tyler? He's shaking his head.
Yep. It was kind of interesting to tie that one to the RDS one. Where's my RDS one? Amazon RDS. There was a researcher that did some awesome research on RDS and some of the weaknesses and what the... Where's that story?
No, you're number 9.
Thank you, Lee. My story number 9. So the log_fwd extension so this was pre-installed in both Aurora SQL, Postgres SQL, and Amazon RDS for PostSQL. A privileged authenticated user able to trigger the bug could use the leaked credentials to gain elevated access to database resources. That sounds like really bad, but really it's in an AWS context. In other words, I get these credentials, and these credentials give me access to, a quote from the article, internal RDS services or move between databases or other AWS accounts. So it kind of seemed to me like you don't get the database credentials necessarily to harvest all the data, but you get credentials that allow you to access all of the resources that are assigned to your AWS resources tied to your database. So if you've tied your database to other AWS stuff, I can gain access to that. That's what my comment was like. I'd be interested to see like how this is exploited in the wild, like what you can do with it.
Right.
Because it's not access to the database, but it's like I've configured RDS before, and you configure it in your VPC, and you say like this RDS instance has access to this and that and the other thing. Like these user roles and these other resources are tied to this database. So that's kind of interesting. It'd be an interesting thing for Rich Mogul and I to talk about.
Yes.
Like
yeah, absolutely.
Like how like an exploit of this kind, like what does that give you access to? I don't think it's fully been kind of explored as to exactly what that gives an attacker access to, which is kind of scary.
And hopefully they won't ever get a chance to because they fixed it.
Hopefully AWS, yeah. And Amazon's AWS team fixes like some pretty like people come with some creative shit and they fix it, which is good. Oh my God. Talk about an article. Like, I don't know that we've covered an article that has spawned like so many questions and other research than my story number 10. Holy crap. So the headline is OpenSSH moves to prevent capture now and decrypt later attacks, right? So, I mean, we all, many of us have been in that transition from Telnet to SSH version 1. SSH version 1 was really shady, right?
Better than Telnet.
Right? Better than Telnet. And when we moved to SSH version 2, there have been other attacks against, you know, the SSH protocol, but I forget who invented the SSH protocol. They're on my list of like people we need to bring on as guests. Like there's a whole history there. It is totally amazing. Like it's an amazing accomplishment of cryptography and computer science and protocols and security, right? Long history in OpenSSH. In their latest version 9.0, they're basically hardening OpenSSH against quantum cryptography attacks. They're like, look, we're going to make these changes in this version to protect if someone were to capture encrypted traffic and then have a quantum computer that can break that cryptography. Like, talk about vision. It's totally amazing. What, like, spawned so much research that we would have to, like, really talk to someone who was, like, a really big crypto kind of...
And could use their psychology degree to come up with some good analogies for us dumb people.
Dude, totally true. Totally true. Like, exactly, like someone who can explain it at the mathematical crypto level, but also.
So imagine you have an orange, and you have a bunch of monkeys. Fuck this orange.
Like I would, exactly. I would love to have like those analogies. Like that would be it would be so amazing to have that explanation. So the open source group will now use a hybrid, streamlined NTRU prime plus an X25519 key exchange method by default. They say it's a move that includes a backstop against future discoveries of flaws in the NTRU algorithm.
What?
I had no idea. That was my exact thoughts. I was like, what? Like, all right, what is NTRU prime? So I found a website that explained it, and when I read the website, I still didn't understand it. So it's a project that recommends switching from cyclotomics to large Galois groups to reduce the attack surface.
Dude, like they have a pill for that.
Lattice-based cryptography. And they go on to describe
like
what the
grapevines
NTRU prime, a streamlined MTRU prime is a small lattice-based KM aimed for the standard of goal of INDCAA2 security.
What?
And again, I'm like researching all that. Like, what do those acronyms mean? KM is
it's more secure.
KM was a thing. Hold on. KM. I did this Google search. KM cryptography is key encapsulation mechanism is what KM is. Like, I had to like literally read the sentence and then research the algorithms and then go back and like reread the sentence to understand it because I totally didn't understand it.
Dude, it's too much work.
Well, like a lot. And then, but then also the X25519 is the Diffie-Hellman based key exchange. So X25519 is an elliptic curve Diffie-Hellman key exchange using curve 25519. I don't know what curve 25519 is. I didn't click that link to see what that is. It says it allows two parties to jointly agree on a shared secret using an insecure channel.
Yeah.
But the whole sentence, I'm like, I'm really intrigued as to exactly how that works.
Yeah.
And like two parties agree on a shared secret using an insecure channel. Like, to me, that's really so. Like, Larry, this I think translates to a lot of wireless protocols, right? That have to allow two parties to agree on a shared secret to use using an insecure channel.
So I may be completely wrong, and I equate the Diffie-Hellman anonymous key exchange thing that they developed.
Sure.
And no intent to slander or libel anyone here, but so much of our computing security is reliant on Diffie-Hellman exchanges. Which is the intent for us to be able to exchange keys anonymously and agree on a set of keys. And Diffie-Hellman developed this stuff while on LSD and Haight-Ashbury.
Like, dude, amazing story. Like, amazing story.
Like,
but like,
holy shit! Like
to put that all in perspective, as like the way I think of Diffie-Hellman is basically like half the key, right? Like, your public and private key is basically like half the key, right? Like, that's the basic premise of Diffie-Hellman. Like, okay, like in SSL, the RSA algorithm,
our two mayonnaises are different.
Established the prime number factoring aspect.
I got Lee with that one,
right? Prime number factoring aspect of all of that, right? So we can, that's like the most highest level explanation of that with no analogy for that. But then, in the context of OpenSSH, in this description, they are using different algorithms to make it resilient to quantum computing based attacks. Like, that requires an expert or two or three in this area to be able to describe how all of that is actually working.
Lee's got a comment.
Fascinating.
I know he does.
So I agree with you to a point, Paul. The basics they're doing, you don't necessarily need a crypto expert to understand.
Sure.
They're raising the bar on the key exchange. They're raising the bar on the crypto algorithm, which is something it's too easy to think, oh yeah, AES 256 is good enough. Well, it's good enough for this interval. And if you want to stay ahead of the game as the computers are getting better, you've got to keep raising the bar. And that's what they're doing. And that's simple. And I think for the average IT person, that's what they need to focus on, is you need to keep moving the bar. You can't just, I mean, how long have we been doing AES 256? 30 years now? And so, and yes, our computers have gotten much better at doing it, and it doesn't take the hit that it did. I love that they're out there pushing the envelope with NTRU and X25519, even though I can't explain them. I know they're
like,
on the cutting edge.
Is it the key size versus the
math
I think
goes
it's two
into
things,
driving
right?
the key?
Like, it's the key size, but also the implementation in the protocol that's implementing the key size. Like, there's a couple of different aspects to that.
Right.
To be able to be resilient to the quantum cryptography, my limited understanding, right? It's kind of breaking it down into logical blocks of key size versus the actual protocol that's implementing that
you're
key.
at this point, you're literally trying to hedge your bet, which is good, about preventing nation states from being able to break your SSH.
But I agree with Larry. Like in the first incarnations of it is going to be nation states. Right. But I think with the amazing vision of Open SSH is like they're not necessarily pinning it to a persona of who's going to break the key. They're just like, I don't care who gets a hold of this technology. We want our keys to be resilient to
it may be three nation states right now. But in 5 years, like, you can do this on the desktop.
Yes.
Like, fix this now so that those three nation states now can't solve this problem. So that 5 years from now, the desktop is still also not plausible.
There's one more thing we have to remember to do, though, and that is that beyond all the security and the strength of the key is to remember to rotate them. You don't run them indefinitely, because the longer they run, the greater the risk that somebody has captured it.
No, it's a great point, Lee. Yeah.
Yep.
When's the last time you changed your SSH host keys?
I can tell you exactly when.
Yeah, me too. Probably the same life cycle point.
Yeah, but also your point, there's great solutions out there for rotating your keys, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I can tell you exactly when, October 8th, 2018.
There you go. That's all. Gotcha. I do want to bring on other people to help explain some of this stuff, because I think it's really fascinating. It's really fascinating.
I didn't mean to mash that point into the wayside. I'd love to be in that conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll work on that. Not as technical, transitioning from really in-depth cryptography to the former Ethereum developer, Virgil Griffith, is sentenced to 5+ years in prison for basically enabling or attempting to enable North Korea to evade certain types of sanctions in money. I want to say money laundering, right? But evade. Tyler, go ahead.
How to leverage cryptocurrency in order to evade sanctions. Like you went and did a presentation at Pyongyang, or however you say it. I'm not good in North Korean, so there was a conference there. He had a lot of evidence against him. With him giving pictures, having no sanctions, a smiley face on the chalkboard.
Right. But what I thought was interesting, just to talk about the justice system for a moment here in the U.S., there was when you're prosecuted here in the U.S. for various crimes, right? This was a federal offense, right? And he was prosecuted in the U.S., but brought to New York. I think there's major cities, like if you're prosecuted for a federal crime, where they have federal prisons that, like, that's not where you're serving your time. That's where you're serving your kind of interim time while you're awaiting sentencing and waiting for your trial. First, your trial to take place, and then sentencing. And he was in the Brooklyn. It's in the article. Hold on.
The BWM.
Yeah, BW Brooklyn something prison. Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center. Yeah. MDC. There's another one, I think maybe for more New York jurisdiction crimes, that's on Ellis Island. It's like on an island as well, where you've heard about similar, like, basically his defense was like, our client that we're representing was in deplorable conditions in a New York based prison, and there's this one, Brooklyn's Metropolitan Detention Center, is for more federal crimes, the way I understand it. There's other ones that are more for localized crimes that seem to me to share similar stories, where inmates have spent inmates might be the wrong term, but I'll use it in this general sense, right? Inmates have spent time in solitary confinement, have not been given proper, basically, health conditions in terms of food, in terms of medical care. I've heard lots of stories in other podcasts I listen to outside of cybersecurity, in terms of getting basic health care, food, all of those. What they said. Now, I didn't think this was true. Not cybersecurity related, right? But the defense was making the argument that like the 10 months that Griffith spent in this prison should be counted as double because the conditions were so deplorable. I don't disagree with that.
Nope.
Based on what I've read about what happens in like these prisons, right? But in some of the other circumstances, the medical care was deplorable. There was a mafia informant named Joe Barone that I listened to a 2-part podcast on, and he talked about this, and I felt really bad for him in that he was cooperating with law enforcement in the FBI, but also all kinds. Go listen to Jordan Harbinger in his interview with Joe Barone. It's amazing. He was like, I got like really crappy medical care, basically. Like I got Mercer, and like it wasn't treated right, and I had to get it treated
for those
again.
outside of Rhode Island. It's MRSA.
MRSA, right?
Mercer.
Mercer.
Right.
Yeah. Did I say that wrong? I had a couple of drinks.
You said it right.
I had a couple of drinks.
You said it right.
But so in this case, Griffith was basically, they were saying the 10 months should count as double.
Yep, cruel and inhumane punishment. Right?
Yeah, I don't disagree. Like, there's some pretty heinous things that happens in the U.S. prison system here. That multiple stories that we've covered on the show that relate back to cybersecurity and or nation state kind of crimes that tie back to cybersecurity. And I'm like, yeah, like I've had to do some of that research, and like I don't disagree with. Right now, what was interesting was, you look on the flip side of that, and what the judge is looking at in this case is that this Griffith was basically, there was pictures of him in like North Korean attire, saying like, hey, here's how you bypass sanctions to use cryptocurrency to get around these sanctions. And that was kind of like the damning evidence against him.
Look at Ukraine right now. Like, you don't want to be trying to bypass sanctions. Like,
yeah.
And as bad as our prisons are, it's still a 5-star compared to many foreign prisons. If you've watched any of the locked up abroad stuff or been to any of the foreign prisons, like, we could have left him in South Korea. It wouldn't have been a
Yep. Like, yeah. How about Turkey? Like, those are some.
There's a lot of prisons like outside of the U.S. You don't,
and
probably even way worse. I mean, again, like what I've researched that happens in U.S. prisons, and then you look at the stuff I've researched in international, like outside the U.S. prisons, like it's bad. Yeah, like there's levels of bad.
Yeah, we watched this show like abandoned. Yeah, I can remember abandoned shit all over the world, and some of them are prisons that closed 10 years ago, and like the conditions that they documented from these prisons 10 years ago are deplorable at best.
Yeah. Well, also there's I strongly recommend the Jordan Harbinger show. I like Jordan Harbinger's podcast. It's really great. Some of the ones he's done are not just prisons, but you're a journalist and you want to go into Syria, right?
Yep.
And like, I don't know if it doesn't really tie to cybersecurity, right? But it kind of ties into some of the, it's almost like a social engineering aspect, which I think is like, it really irks me that major media companies in the US are like, we're not sending our staff journalist into Syria, but if you're an up and coming journalist, and you want to go to Syria and get that firsthand account, like that's how you move up in the ladders. But a high percentage of up and coming journalists that are like, I'm in Turkey and I want to go to Syria, are getting kidnapped and then held for a hostage, basically. And I mean, dude, you're not in a prison at that point. Like,
if you're not killed.
If you're not killed, you're not killed, which in a lot of cases I've heard, Tyler, like they're doing you a favor if you're freaking killed, right? Which is deplorable. But they're like, you're basically held by terrorists,
and we're not. Paying,
and like your conditions are like,
we're not paying ransom for the new guy.
Your conditions are 1,000 times worse of being in a U.S. prison. Like that's like, it's interesting. He's done interviews with those journalists who have actually made it out and not gotten captured. Then he's done interviews with people who are the hostage negotiators with terrorist groups like Hamas and others in not in Pakistan but in Syria, and they're like, dude, you're a journalist that got captured. Like, your chances of survival are really low. And by the way, if you survive, like, you're in a world of hurt for probably a really long time, and you're lucky if you make it back alive after that. Like, though, this story just kind of reminded me of that whole shit that happens in this world that, like, most people are ignorant to, which I strongly encourage people kind of educate themselves about. And if you're an up-and-coming journalist, don't go to Syria. Like, please don't try and make a name for yourself in some of these countries, because it's not going to end well for you at all.
No.
Don't. North Korea is probably not a great place to help out. And honestly, like, the narcissism you read in some of the psychology pieces of this dude, like, he wanted to come back, on a spotlight, be a crypto hero, give the government a finger. Like, it's North Korea. Like, anything about geopolitical and how North Korea actually operates, like, you're stupid for helping them. You're stupid for going over there. Like, I get the people. It's a sad situation.
But Tyler, that happens in a lot of other countries as well. Jordan also did an interview with someone who was in Denmark, that, like, there are groups in countries outside of North Korea that create these cults, if you will, that support the North Korean government. And I think he interviewed someone that was kind of like a double agent. He was like, I'll be part of one of these groups. And he's like, I'll inform law enforcement. And, like, thankfully, it's like, so that other people don't fall into this cult of, like, you're not from North Korea, you're from Denmark, but you're in this group that's supporting this, like, heinous regime in North Korea. That's kind of what this story reminded me of as well. A lot of great stories about that educate people about, like, what's happening in some of these countries, that when I read this article, I was like, that's really bad. Like, you can't be supporting some of these regimes.
So to take us out, Paul, I'd love to cover a story a little bit more fun.
Please, let's end on a more positive note. That was a really dark.
Specifically, my story number 2.
Really dark.
Because from now on, I am going to be known as the hacker formerly known as Hackster the Matrix. And I'm going to be representing myself as a Unicode symbol, known as the right angle with downward zigzag arrow. Now, this was a great thing about. So it's a Unicode character, U237C, otherwise known as Wrangle Down Zigzag Arrow or ampersand Angzar.
It looks like an XY axis with the plot points that are outside of the X and Y axis.
And an arrow, yep.
Yeah.
And to me, this is very representative of someone going into an organization and having to figure out how to support all of this legacy shit in their organization from a security perspective. Because specifically, this right angle with downward zigzag arrow showed up as part of some adopted stuff into all of the Unicode characters in 1991 as an additional mathematical character. But no one knows what the fuck it represents. What mathematical operation does it represent? In fact, in 1991, they didn't even have a representation of what this was supposed to be.
That's really...
This is because they could.
It's because they could. They put this thing in to represent something maybe that later we want to decide what it represents in 1991. And then... 1993 and 2000, and, like, just it keeps getting moved forward in all of these adaptations and is still present today in the Unicode character set, and no one knows what the fuck it means.
This is the meaning of the character in question will be whatever meaning is assigned by whoever uses it next.
It is my name.
If anyone uses it at all.
It is my current hacker handle.
That's
there. It is. Done.
Angzar.
thank you, Mr. Jonathan Chan, a student at UBC who did all the research on the background, and now I get to claim it.
I love it.
I love that like master's degree students can take the luxury or opportunity to research these esoteric things and kind of bring them to light.
Enjoy paying for that when you have the time to do it and the motivation to still undertake those efforts.
Yeah, but I still but I think a lot of academic research, like as we've covered on the show, like might not be relevant today. But then you fast forward 5-10 years in the future, and all of a sudden, like it's relevant, right?
All I'm doing is thinking of, can I use this in email to get past spam filters, or encode my malware with this Unicode that gets decrypted and it has its own purpose? Like, this seems amazing. 2 bytes, yeah.
Yeah.
It's pretty wild, Larry.
Crazy. The hacker formerly known as Hacker of the Matrix is now identified by a right angle squiggly mark.
What is the actual Unicode code?
It is.
His research paper is amazing.
23.7c.
23.7c.
Yep. Right angle with downward zigzag arrow.
Thank you, 23.7c.
You're welcome.
23.7c.
That's great. That's good stuff. Well, thank you everyone for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and